Hi there, welcome to URBINARY, the podcast cataloging the everyday and extraordinary in the city.
Hello everyone and welcome back to URBINARY. I'm Giulia and today I'm here with Nikhil Shah. Nikhil, a multifaceted research architect and urban designer, is currently immersed in his doctoral studies in urban planning, design and policy at Politecnico di Milano, Italy. He previously served as a government and public sector advisor to the Smart Cities mission under the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, Government of India. With extensive experience in various research roles, he has contributed to projects exploring diverse facets of urban development, from water-city relationship to participatory housing. His research interests span a wide array of topics, including indigenous studies, urbanism in Himalayan settlements, and sustainable development. Holding a master in urban design from the School of Planning and Architecture in Delhi, Nikhil brings a wealth and knowledge and passion to his academic and professional pursuit. Today, Nikhil discusses the intricate relationship between rivers and Indian civilization, focusing on Bengre Estuary in Mangalore. He explored the challenges faced by the community in this ecological sensitive area due to conflict policies and development trajectories, highlighting the need for a nuanced approach balancing indigenous practices with top-down policies for sustainable development. Hi, Nikhil, and thanks for being with us.
Yeah, firstly, thank you, Julia. And this research, which we would be sort of talking about today, is sort of a response to the degrading ecological health of rivers, not just in India, but all around the world. And various planning paradigms and approaches which sort of deal with water systems at national, local, regional, as well as global level, which have been sort of developed in say last 6 to 7 decades, and the current conditions of how planning paradigms are shifting in fragile territories or say eco-sensitive areas. So that's something which we'll be taking it up as part of our talk today.
Okay, thank you very much for this introduction.
URBINARY.
So, as a first question, we want to understand how do you perceive the complex play between the coastal regulation zone policies and the indigenous planning paradigms in the context of the Bengre Estuary case study. Could you also elaborate on any specific challenges or conflict arising from this dynamic?
Sure, definitely. That's a very interesting and pertinent question, I would say. Firstly, in the context of Indian subcontinent, CRZ, which is the Coastal Regulation Zone, has been one of the laws which has observed maximum number of amendments. And specifically, with the 2019 amendment, there is a greater and greater risk of commercialization along the coastal zone in India, and that also comes with a risk of reduction of say coastal regulatory zone or coastal protection zone, which is NDZ, which is non-development zone, from 200 meters to 50 meters. So that is the kind of conflict which we are observing all along the coastline. And specifically now getting into the scenario of Bengre Estuary, there was a breakwaters which was constructed almost 2 decades back. And that is a project which was sort of funded by ADB Bank and with more than $40 million plus of finance. But with making up of this breakwater, which is the world's largest breakwater, what started to happen is that there have been washing away of the coastline with every single monsoon season. So what one really needs to understand is that breakwaters were not a localized kind of solution, but they ended up sort of disrupting the entire coast of Dakshin Kannada. And the conflict really here is definitely between sort of adapting with natural systems and sort of livelihood and threat to the habitat of coastal communities, but it's also the conflict of the worldviews itself. A planning paradigm which is a very, very top-down, coming from a sort of global imposition, to planning paradigm which is very, very local and indigenous, and which understands all of these cyclical balances of environment and ecosystems.
Yeah, okay. So it's very interesting. And I think also if we connect with the conference within your interview is located, it's very interesting to discuss about the concept of conflict because you mentioned just now that there are several scales involved in the conflict within this case study. Okay, so moving on, in the abstract that you show in the conference, you mentioned the vulnerability of the coastal community in Bengre Estuary to the economic-driven land development and issues of relocation and displacement force faced by indigenous community. So we want to understand how do you propose balancing economic development with the ecological sustainability and the preservation of cultural heritage in such contexts.
Sure. So, definitely to balance the kind of economic development which we are sort of observing nationally and globally as well, and simultaneously balancing ecological sustenance. I think the key route there is strengthening of local self-governance and more economic sovereignty being given to these communities. So, specifically with regards to the Breakwaters project, which we talked about, the kind of interaction or community participation which happened was something which was very tokenistic, and a lot of nature based solutions, as we like to call them today, or say ecological practices which these communities observed for millennia together, were not really considered in the entire process of planning and participation. So that is something which became the root of the problem itself. And moving on into the future, I think there are projects such as there's this one project called as Yetina Hole project, which plans to sort of redirect the water upstream to sort of feed into some of the drought-prone areas. But with this kind of paradigm, what one is really looking up to is disruption of the natural flow of water systems at a massive scale, and certain levels of embankments which have already been made as part of the project, and some other projects such as waterfront projects. What one starts to observe is that there is a disruption of ecological balance of the estuary itself, plus the communities that sort of depend on these very fragile ecosystems.
Okay, nice. I think that something that I really like in your answer, it was the fact that you stressed that sometimes when we plan in such context, but in general, when we plan, we are not really able to consider the practices and activities that local community uh, did just also before our arrivals in a place. So it's very interesting and important to point out that we also have to reflect on this. So, as a final question on your specific research, we would like to understand if you could elaborate on the specific role of placemaking-centered design in addressing the challenges faced by the case study that you mentioned and similar other maybe coastal regions. So, how this approach integrate the diverse perspectives of local communities, stakeholders, and ecological considerations to create sustainable development framework.
Sure, absolutely. I think the key to sort of addressing our design approach and the interventions itself was to understand water systems at large. So sometimes when we talk about master plans, we tend to confine water within, like say, two lines, but water doesn't really behave in such rigid and regimental manner. So it's something which is a very dynamic landscape, and how does one really understand the dynamism of it more than mapping was something which was a constant sort of dialogue which we had all through the design process. So we started understanding water as three kind of systems: one which was still water, flowing water, and expansive water. And understanding this dynamism of water, and not in a localized way, but also in the settlement-wide scale as well as the regional scale, became a crucial sort of factor for the design process further. So eventually, what we sort of undertook as part of the design process in participation with the local communities was to really define and understand the role of design in these kind of ecologically sensitive areas. And what we realized is that one needs to look into dynamism of the landscape, as well as the livelihoods questions of livelihood security which are associated with this dynamic landscape itself, and simultaneously arrive at design solutions which sort of are in alignment with the sort of economy based or economy driven planning processes. And eventually, what we arrived at was a simple intervention of a walkway along the sort of Bengre Estuary, which sort of is in line with the local livelihoods of the local community, as well as their sort of needs, their very basic needs, and also the shifting nature of landscape, which we talked about. So that is something which was sort of not really a very mainstream kind of design intervention, which one would really look into, but definitely it's a design intervention that works in this very specific context and is something which is co-created in participation with local communities. So that's how this particular sort of intervention series of interventions came through, and definitely, and you can read more about this in the paper itself. And with that, I think I would want to acknowledge my co-authors who have been sort of instrumental in developing this particular idea as an approach of research, as well as developing the paper, Mr. Shaumik Desai and Ms. Apurva Caroline. And apart from that, there was a wonderful bunch of students which we worked with, which is fourth year urban studio students at Nitte Institute of Architecture, who were sort of our participants in the research as well.
Urbinary.
So now I wanna like go back to the IASOP conference theme, where we kind of discuss how we can bridge the gap between academia and the broader community. That was the main task that we try to delve into during the conference. So we want to understand from you how we can foster meaningful connections and collaboration to translate our academic insights into real-world impacts.
Definitely. I think bridging the gaps is something which is very, very key and instrumental in the kind of world we are living in right now. And we can no more definitely live in silos or operate in silos. So developing new partnerships is something I believe is very, very instrumental, and developing partnerships not just for collaboration purposes, but finding new institutional structures of planning is something which is very, very sort of key to addressing the challenges that lay in front of us. So, how does one really say remodel space for indigenous knowledge systems in the planning, education, and built environment discourses? Is a question which is of prime concern and importance. And in our experience of working with a lot of indigenous communities, sometimes we discovered out of surprise that although all of these knowledge systems might not have very elaborate theoretical framework, or they might not sort of come with a very elaborate kind of literature grounding or mainstream ways in which our academia sort of operates, but then they give us or throw us into a very different worldview altogether itself, which makes us question the fundamentals of planning and design processes at large. So that is something which is required more than ever before in the kind of dynamic environment and challenges which we live through. So definitely we need to foster new partnerships and increase space for research also within the local governance and administration at large too.
Okay, so thank you very much, Nikhil, for being with us today and for your wonderful responses.
Thank you so much for having me.
Urbinary.
So this was our last interview from the participant of IASOP, but we will meet again in our next episode. So for our listeners, stay tuned for our next episode. We'll recap our journey. Urbinary is produced in collaboration with Poliradio, the official radio channel at Politecnico di Milano.
Urbinary, the podcast cataloging the everyday and extraordinary in the city.